Good morning, ladies. I thought I would film this morning out in my garden. There's a nice shadow on my patio table, so hopefully you'll be able to see exactly what I'm going to be doing. So the subject for this morning is making what I'm calling posy style buttonholes. There is absolutely no wiring at all, so they are nice and easy to make. You don't need any particular skills with matching your wires and your buttonhole tape. But a word of warning. The buttonhole tape that you use making a traditional buttonhole helps seal in the moisture. So although this technique is very easy to do, gives a lovely pleasing look and is very on trend at the moment, your flowers won't be in a water source. Well, they won't have any moisture sealed in, I should say, and therefore they are prone to dying, possibly dying off quicker than you would really want them to. So you need, everything I seem to tell you and show you comes with a health warning. You need to understand the technique so you understand what it is that you are getting yourself into. The look will be beautiful, the pictures you'll have seen in magazines and Pinterest will be beautiful, but you may possibly be in a situation where, having made your buttonholes up, you might be putting them in loads and loads of tiny little vases until you're just about to leave for the ceremony, and then you'll be taking them out and drying off their little damp ends before you put them on to wear. One thing you can do though is to use really robust materials. So this would be a great one if, like Vanessa, you're having a meadow-style wedding, is to think about using dried flowers because they are preserved because they are dried, and they will be a really great flower to use, but it just depends whether or not that goes in with your look. So what I'm going to do is to switch the camera around and have it leaning over the table, and then you'll be able to see what I'm doing. Now at the moment I'm having problems, I think that's you watching, Joan, that I've not been able to see the comments as they come in on my last few Facebook Lives. I did turn my phone off this morning and switch it back on again, so hopefully that may well have solved the problem. But if I'm not answering your specific question, if you're watching live, I will come back to you after the end of the video, so don't think I'm ignoring you. Right, so let's go. I shall move you over and we're going to go down. You've got a good view there of the beautiful sky we've got this morning in Kent. It's a lovely day, and long may the weather last, although I think possibly it's going to get colder the next few days. So we've got the table, there we go. We're on posy style buttonholes, brackets, not wired. So I'm hoping that Facebook will pick that up and that can become the cover photo for the video, so you should be able to find it easily when you come back. So my little box of ingredients here. I am using pearl-headed pins. I always like to put a pin with the buttonhole so I know there's a buttonhole per the pin and the buttonhole are matched and ready to go. I'm going to tie off my posy style buttonholes using garden string, because for me that goes in with the very simple look and style of these buttonholes. You do have an option to use ribbon. Possibly even this narrow ribbon here might be a little bit wide. But I'm going to show you another technique for finishing off your buttonholes, which even if you don't want to make this style, you may want to use this technique for creating a little bow that might sit at the top end of your buttonhole, and that's why I've got my rose wires here for tying the middle of my bow off, and then my trusty pair of scissors. So I have been foraging, and I'm going to stand up. Hopefully I'm not going to drag the camera over or knock my chair. So I've been channeling what I know that Vanessa's going to be using for her wedding. So this is my version of what the forage style would be, using actual real foraged flowers. So we'll see how these will hold up. So first of all, here I've got oxeye daisy, which is quite a robust daisy, but we've spoken before about how you may need to think about faking it up to get the flowers that you want. So although you may want a forage style country looking wedding, you may find for longevity and robustness you're finding Florist applied flowers that give you the same look. So I'm going to be using some of those. I've also got these tiny little daisies. Now I don't know what they're called. Perhaps when I bring them into shot, they're all getting tangled, what those are. They look like feverfew or chamomile. They're definitely not feverfew because the leaf isn't the right shape. It's got this sort of very delicate leaf here. I mean, it looks like a chamomile flower, but again, I'm not sure what the chamomile leaf looks like. But these is growing in the wayside on our verges locally. So I think, again, it gives you that idea of a country meadow look. And just to channel that look, yes, I've picked up some of the oilseed rape pods. It's all getting tangled in front of me. I'll need to sort these out in a minute. Again, sort of going for that meadow look. So oilseed is a bright yellow, acid yellow flower, April time, and now it's set seed, and this will eventually go brown, and then the seeds will burst open. And I have got a few ears of corn as well, a few ears of wheat, I should say. So again, getting that country style look. Now, see how long they are. So you need to make sure that everything you're making is in scale. So that is, you know, the length of my finger there. There's quite a big bit of corn, but this might be an opportunity to use some of the dried grasses, or if you're buying, you know, from your florist, whether you can specify that you want a short length of wheat. You'll have to discuss that. So I'm going to get rid of some of this mess and just stick with a few choice stems so I don't get all confused. And I'll stick with my few stems of my chamomile looking. I did pick some fern, but it's drooped and gone a bit funny, so we're not going to use that. And then we'll have a few of the oxeye daisies as well. I'm going to cut that one off there. So, materials at the ready. I'm putting what I'm not going to use back in my bucket of water, which is just off camera, and then we can get going. So in theory, this is a really easy way to make buttonholes. You take off your flowers, take off any greenery, and you make a little posy in your hand. I mean, what could be simpler? So for instance, you'd have, again, your main flower. I've damaged that one. Let's have a main flower that isn't damaged. So you start off with your main flower, and then so I would call this your focal flower if you're being technical. I call it a wow flower if you get finding the technical terms difficult to grapple with. And then some smaller pieces. So these would be my little wispy bits at the end, or the in-betweenies. But you do the same thing as you would do with any flower. If you're making a posy, we're making a tiny posy, I'm stripping off the bits of green that I don't need. So there is a little bit of wastage. So I might start off with 2 little bits of that, the large oxeye daisy there, and perhaps an ear of corn, and then we'll see whether this works with the oilseed pod as well. So it's up to you what you include in your little posy arrangement. So I'm going to start off with my flower here, and you can see, you know, thinking about the scale, when I put the two together there, that is just quite a chunky monkey. So it may be that it just looks too big together, and decide also whether I want to keep that leaf on there. For the moment I am going to. So you just make something that looks pleasing to the eye, and it's up to you how many constituent parts you have in your little buttonhole, and you make it up to suit your taste. I'm going to pinch out those bits there, and on the seed pod, pinch them up. So I've got all my bushes at the top. I'm not sure that's adding anything. Let's see if I can put that around the back. Perhaps around the back it's not so bad there. So you've got all the flower heads here and then the smooth stems at the bottom. So it's as we would make a hand-tied posy, but there aren't enough materials in it to actually make it with a spiraled effect. But I've still got, if I hold it that way round, the focal flower and then tapering off. So we're still sticking with those principles of the florist that you use, that your eye bounces here, lands here, and then tapers off. You can imagine that bit lying against your lapel with a bit, if I hold it that way, of forward movement here. So it's almost like it's wedge shaped, pointed here, and you can imagine there's a triangle going on there. So it's not totally flat, but it will sit nicely against your lapel. And then tie it off, you know, made that in 30 seconds. So let's get a piece of string. And what I'm going to do here is leave myself with a bit of extra string, and I'm going to flop that over the flower head. I need to tie off with that other bit in a minute. And then come down the stem and firmly and securely tie round. It's like everything when we tie, it needs to sit where you want it to sit. Be firm, not fall apart, but you don't want to be pulling so tightly that you have damaged your flowers. So these daisies have got quite soft stems. I'm going to go down like that. And I need to tie off up here, so I need to travel a bit. I need to go down a little. I'm going to cut off my string now, it's getting in the way. I've used quite a bit of string for this one small piece. Then I'm going to travel back up again. Back to the beginning, so I've got my ending string here, my starting string there, and I tie a knot. And that would be your buttonhole. You could do this with raffia as well, that would look like a nice finish. So it could just be a really neat knot, or you might decide you want to tie a bow, depending again on your look. So a little bow there. The trick for the bow is to pull in your tails and pull firmly on your loop. And try and get that even. You might even want to do a double knot on the bow and then trim to size the little tails here. So whether you finish with a knot or a bow is up to you. And then trim off these legs to the length that you want. So I would just do a blunt straight the way across. And add in my pearl-headed pin to finish. And that would be a really simple country-inspired buttonhole, this sort of posy style. It is long, so imagine, you know, I'm stretching out my thumb and finger here, and I can imagine that on my lapel that would be quite long, but I have been governed by the length of my wheat, so this is purely for demonstration purposes only. I think probably my wheat is a little bit long, but I've tied it as low down as I could, so it gives you the idea, but it may not actually be the total length that you want. Now the issue I was discussing earlier was that now, of course, these cut stems aren't protected. There's no tape on there sealing in the moisture, so the flowers are going to wilt. You know, imagine that you've picked some flowers, and you know, let's say that you've got an 11 o'clock wedding. So you're probably you're getting dressed and having photographs taken, you know, perhaps from 10 o'clock onwards, you know, an hour before the wedding, and then you've got photographs, and then you're sitting down for the meal. You know, how long are these flowers going to be out of water? So you want the flowers to look great, and, you know, up to the point that the wedding photographs have been taken, and anything after that is a bonus. So you just run the risk that these flowers will have 100% wilted, and what you want to make sure you've done is got you know, a long-lasting buttonhole that looks nice on your lapel, which is why behind the scenes the florist will be keeping these ends damp and in water and only taking them out at the absolute last minute. So you just need to factor that worry factor in, and whether you would prefer to go for materials like the corn, if I allowed that to dry out, for totally dried materials. So you would be, you know, using home dried materials or professionally dried materials and making it using dried flowers. There is a word of caution there as well though, that dried flowers are brittle, and therefore you may end up snapping things and they sort of disintegrate, you know, break down in your fingers. So probably the watchword there is to have more than you think you will need. So that would be the very basic style, and you could jazz that up. So either, as I say, with a knot or with a bow. You could do coloured string, you could do raffia, entirely up to you. And the length of this binding down here, you decide whether you just want a few rings here or whether you want to go all the way down to really make a feature of the end here. But what I have done is I have included some ribbon in my box of tricks this week, so I'll show you how to make some little bows, and then you could decide if you wanted to decorate your buttonholes with little bows. So I will whiz up another buttonhole so I can show you what I mean. I did find myself another oxeye daisy. And a few more of the little chamomile daisies, not sure what they are, just to add a bit of movement and bulk, and perhaps a little sprig of the oilseed as well. So exactly the same thing, making it in your hand. Actually, that's a bit loose there, that leaf. I might take that leaf off. So it's just because my wheat is quite long, I'm having to sort of make a more pronounced look. I've got some side shoots from the oxeye daisy. Perhaps that'll help come from the main flower to a bud and then to the point here, and fill out with these little filler flowers. So lining everything up so it looks pleasing in your hand. Now what I'm going to do here, because I need to hold that, you might want to put a bit of the tape on here or a little bit of string. I'm going to use a wire for the moment, because I don't want to put my string on until last, because my string actually is my decorative detail. So I'm going to use a wire just to hold everything together. So I'm using a rose wire here, just against my thumb. And I'm just going to go around a couple of times to hold everything in place. Now this, what is like a cheese wire, I need to pull it tight so everything holds. And I'm conscious of those fleshy stems there, and I don't want to damage them. I'm going to give that a twist. So I've wrapped it around twice, given it a twist, cut off the excess. Must make sure I get rid of those stems so they don't end up in the garden. And I'm just going to bend the spiker bits over so I don't cut myself. So again, that would be a little posy. You can see there, this is too long. Shall I see if I can just twist out the top piece to try and get the scale to sit more easily? You can see I've done that, left myself with a truncated end. So not to do that in real life. It doesn't quite look the same, but it just gives me a better sense of scale for the moment. So I'm practicing. I mean, I'm not practicing, but you know what I mean. We are just doing this for demonstration purposes, is probably what I should be saying. So let's say you want to add a little ribbon trim here. It's going to be really fiddly trying to tie a bow on the actual buttonhole itself. So I say this loads, that a lot of floristry is just faking it up. So what I'm going to do is take a bit of ribbon, I don't know how long's that, 12 centimetres long, and cut it off. I'm then going to fold it over, and the way I was taught this is to think about, you remember when you used to wear a tie to school? Do people still wear ties to school? So this is my back of my neck here, and you bring your tie round and then you start doing your fiddling around at the end. So you've got the length of the ribbon in your hands, and you bring it to the front and cross it over. And you've then got that, either a fish or it's like the little pink breast cancer ribbon. And then where it's crossed over, you let that sink to this loop at the bottom, like that. And you can see if I turn that round, you're starting to get a ribbon shape, but it looks a bit flat and misshapen. All will be sorted out in a moment. So I'm pinching that in the middle. I'm taking another of the rose wires. I'm holding that across the middle. These rose wires are so silvery. I'm conscious that I'm not entirely sure you can see them, but it's running from here down to there. I'm bending that back to the back of my ribbon, and I'm pinching it together. So at the moment I'm just scrunching the ribbon up. I will sort all that business out later. So I'm folding it there, holding it, because at this point if I let go, I'm going to have to start again, and take the two wires and twist them round. And that is what is going to hold the bow in place. You need to make sure the twists are really close to this ribbon edge here. If you're too slack, you'll end up with a little gap here, and you'll be able to just pull your ribbon out of the hole. And then I've got a little bow here on a stick, and you can even out, let's see if I can even out those loops a little bit, not quite sure I can, and then start to dress the ribbon a little bit so that the tails point downwards and the bow loops go upwards. I've ended up with a mismatched ribbon there, so we would have to practice that and perfect the technique. You can see already that the ribbon is starting to fray, so you need to trim that off. You can do that with make a dovetail, but it's a very tiny ribbon here. I'm going to do it by cutting my ribbon on a slant at about 45 degrees and finishing off. And you may find, depending on the size of the buttonhole you're creating, that even this ribbon that is quite narrow, less than a centimetre, you may decide it's too thick and want to go even smaller, hence making your little ribbon detail is going to be trickier. And you can see there, you can add it on, and doesn't it look really lovely? So you could, perhaps coordinate the ribbons with perhaps the sashes on the bridesmaids' dresses, or some other detail you've got in for the wedding. So again, it's personal taste as to whether you want to add this. So what I would then do is treat these bits of wire as part of the natural stem of your little buttonhole and lay them on the edge there, and then wrap over. So you could wrap this with another bit of ribbon or a bit of string. What should we do? Ribbon or string? I'm not seeing any comments. So should we keep it all ribbon looking? So reel myself off some ribbon. Actually, I'm not going to cut the ribbon. It's always a good idea. You never quite know how much ribbon you need. What I'm going to do here is exactly the same thing I did with my string, and leave myself some ribbon at the top end. So I'm starting about 10 centimetres down. And I'm holding that there because I'm going to work my way down the stem and tie off with this bit at the end. So it's a bit of forward thinking. And then with I'm going to do a longer length of ribbon to show you. I'm going to cut off my wires. So I need enough wire left to hold and secure my buttonhole, but I don't want any showing at the bottom. I'm going to bring my ribbon down the length of my stems, here, binding everything together, just catching everything. I'm going to let go here at the top, and then I'm going to start wrapping the ribbon round from the bottom heading back to the top of my little buttonhole. And this is the reason I don't cut the ribbon off, is because you never quite know how much you're going to use. But you'll always also see that actually this is quite ribbon hungry. And if you are going to use ribbon to bind off your bouquet or your buttonholes, you'll need to make sure you've got lots of it. So I've gone right the way up. You just probably do one more wind round, because I can see a tiny bit of wire there. I'm going to go around one more time, complete loop round, cut off the ribbon now, holding it down. I'm going to tie a knot underneath my bow, so it looks like my bow has got 4 tails instead of just the 2. So it's quite fiddly because the buttonhole is so tiny. So you could do this without, you could use the same wrapping technique but just not put the bow on the top if that's what you wanted, and then decide whether you wanted double bows or not. If you didn't, you'd need to cut them off, but you'd need to have a finer ribbon. So it's all about thinking about the bulk as well. So it does look, it's almost like a sort of grand country wedding there. And why not? Let's go for long tails. Sometimes I cut them at different lengths just to get a bit of natural sway and movement. So it's a matter of looking at the finishes and what finish you think suits. So you might want to go really rustic with brown string and raffia or raffia, tied with a knot or a bow. But you saw how fiddly it was to tie the bow, so knots might be a good idea. And if you wanted to add in a ribbon, you could do a ribbon, but you could bind with string underneath, or you could, if you were going for more of the luxury end of the meadow looking wedding, you could bind with ribbon all the way down. And this technique here I'm showing you is a great way if you're making your hand-tied bouquets and you wanted a ribbon with a bow. That is the way you would make it. And you could always tie a natural bow at the top. If you do want to have a bow that looks more precise, you may find it easier to fake it up first of all with the little bow tied with the wire to begin with. And then to finish that off, I would add my pearl-headed pin, and then it's quite nice, especially if you've got a photographer coming to the house, to present them. So I've got this little wooden platter which I got from a charity shop, but I would probably put them either in a cardboard box. This way you need to be saving boxes, you know, the lids, shoe boxes, line them with tissue paper, and then I would put a little note on there on a piece of paper saying, let's rip a piece of paper off, to identify who the buttonhole belonged to. So, you know, Granny, Bob, whoever it's going to be, and I would put it on there with the piece of paper to be removed. But that way, you know, it's just another check. You know, how many people do you need to make buttonholes for? You've written it on your list, you're ticking them off as you go, but it's just so you know that this one belongs to Bob, this one belongs to Mary, and you've given everybody the one they need. Especially important if you are jazzing up the grooms and the best mans, and lesser members of the wedding party are getting more simple buttonholes. So that would be the meadow-style buttonhole. They are absolutely beautiful, lovely to make. You can use all the odds and ends from your, you know, table arrangements and side shoots from your bouquets, but they are fiddly to make. And for me, the concern is, and I haven't trimmed that one down to size, is that they're not in water. And especially here, you see how I've done the long ribbon here? There's only a tiny amount of natural stem. Imagine if you ribboned up, and then you've got to try and stand that in water overnight. I don't think you want to be making these on the morning of. You've got other things to be doing. Or it means you'll be ribboning on the morning of, or you decide to go for the option where it's got the string on it which doesn't matter so much if it gets wet, but of course you don't want to be putting a wet buttonhole on your lapel. So I think I'm going to leave it for the moment. And this is one, have a practice with. It really is fiddly on the fingers, and I think my personal preference is I would rather do the wiring. Somehow my fingers cope with the wiring a bit better, and it's almost it's just you're trying to do too much on something that's too small, and I just worry about the longevity of having fresh materials that haven't got a source of water locked in. So I hope you've got something out of that. I hope you've enjoyed that. I know Vanessa's been practicing her buttonholes, and Joan, you've been practicing your flower crown. So do keep dropping in your works in progress into the group, and I can give you a few handy hints and feedback as you get nearer and nearer to your wedding day. So I'll sign off now and catch up with you next week. So next week, we're going to come back in with more buttonholes. We're going to be a bit more modern next week, and I'm going to get my glue out. And then after that, I know, Joan, you've been asking for a really delicate, pretty corsage, so we'll move on to that in later weeks. So next week, it is glue, and I'll be showing you how to make a buttonhole in a more modern style, but using glue as your fixing. So I shall sign off and see you next week.